Good evening. I'm Antoine Hawkins, special needs librarian with the Greensboro Public Library. On behalf of the Greensboro Public Library and the Greensboro Public Library Foundation, welcome to Mental Health in the Black Community. Thank you to those of you in the audience who contribute to the foundation. It's through your support that we can offer quality programming. In partnership with the community, the Greensboro Public Library strives to promote free and equal access to information, foster lifelong learning, and inspire the joys of reading. The Greensboro Public Library is your conduit to so many resources. If you don't have a library card, please stop by your local library branch and sign up for a free card. You can visit greensborolibrary.org to find a branch near you and to learn about all of our library programs. Now, please be aware that this program is being recorded and may be shared on the Greensboro Public Library social media channels, including YouTube. If you do not wish to be recorded, you are welcome to turn off your camera, or you can edit your name as displayed in Zoom. Recordings may be edited for length. Please note that recordings and related chat messages are public records, subject to North Carolina's public records law, and may be disclosed to third parties. Also, please note that the program will be an hour, and at the end of the program, if we have not covered any of your questions in the chat box, then we will answer all questions at the very end. And thank you again for coming. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for the evening. Nicole Osborne is a licensed therapist and co-owner of Milk and Honey Therapy in Greensboro, North Carolina. For over 10 years, she specialized in work with teens and young adults from diverse cultural backgrounds and uses creative and holistic approaches to help clients overcome anxiety, depression, traumas, and life situations and transitions. Professor and licensed clinical social worker, Dr. Kimberly Outlaw received her PhD in addictions and rehabilitation, specializing in minority athletes, depression, and substance abuse in collegiate sports. She has published journals and topics and is currently completing a textbook exploring mental health, advocacy, and substance abuse in athletes. She has recently made history as the first Black female elected to serve on the Lenoir County School Board. Also joining the panel is Dr. Bobby Armstrong, PhD, a board certified clinical physical psychotherapist, pastoral counselor, and pastoral psychologist, providing faith-based therapy with fundamental psychology. In his practice at Empowering Counseling in Greensboro, North Carolina, he focuses on the holistic wellness of the mind, body, and spirit. So thank you all for joining. And we would like to begin by first exploring what is mental health.
Well, I don't know if you wanted us to go in a particular order or not, but what I think our panelists will agree with me on is mental health is a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. And, as licensed professionals on this panel, we have to make sure that the well-being of a person, we check on every facet, their environment, we just look at the whole person. A lot of times, when you go to therapy, or you should, we're looking to offer assistance with resources, as well as looking at your environment, what you have going on, obviously, diagnosing, assessing the situation, if you will. And we tend to, like I said, define mental health as a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being.
Definitely. And along with that, we also have to understand that how we think, feel, and act are all connected. And so if we think a certain way, then it leads us to feel a certain way, and then we act a certain way. So if our mental health isn't in check, then other areas of our life are going to be impacted. So your mental health impacts your finances, impacts your job, it impacts your life, your spiritual, physical well-being, and your relationships. So holistic approach. Mental health is in my belief, is everything, because it starts in your mind.
And I will agree, mental health, it encompasses the whole of the person. It takes into account every facet of our being, our environment, how we interact. Our mental health also affects our physical health. So we're not mentally healthy. A lot of times we're not physically healthy, and that can be vice versa as well. So mental health is the overall well-being of the person.
Okay, so what are some of the perceptions in the Black community as far as what mental health may look like, or if you have a healthy mental health, if that's a such thing?
I think in the Black community, and I think in the general community, therapy and mental health have looked a certain way. And so if therapy is only for white people, therapy is only for people who have money, therapy is for crazy people. And so there's a lot of negative perceptions. And so with that, you know, therapy can look a number of different ways. And so when you seek out looking for a therapist, you can find a therapist who doesn't do something traditional like sitting in the office face to face. You can find a therapist who does gardening. You can find a therapist who does therapy in the park. You can find a therapist who does equine therapy, which is therapy with a horse, or therapy with other types of animals. And so there's this perception that therapy looks a certain way. And in the media, they typically show like, you know, you're sitting on a chair or you're laying on a couch, and the therapist, not trying to offend anybody, but can be kind of like monotone and just like, you know, wah kind of situation. But that's not everybody's therapy approach. And so I think that's another perception that's out there.
There is a stigma in the Black community about mental health in the Black community. And I believe that stigma has its deep roots in pride, has its deep roots in keeping things in the family. We don't let things outside of the family. There are so many perceptions out there. However, the good of mental health is being able to express, being able to speak, whereas you're not speaking to someone who has a biased opinion. You're able to speak with confidence and being able to just unload and decompartmentalize all of those built-in emotions and Herbert emotions. There are so many perceptions, both positive and negative, but I think the negative has outweighed the positive, and we're trying to change that. So we're trying to break that stigma.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the stigmas. Where do you think these stigmas began?
Well, I think, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Dr. Armstrong? Go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Dr.
Okay. I was just going to say that for me, growing up in Eastern North Carolina, and Antoine and I, we did grow up in the same hometown. And we grew up in in what we call the Bible Belt. And religion, tends to be at the heart of a lot of our belief system. And certainly I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But what I am saying is that some attitudes, especially a very long time ago with the baby boomer generation and even Gen X generation, it was like perceived as something, sinful if you did want to see a therapist, or it really wasn't looked at in a positive way. Like it just wasn't. It wasn't looked at as my colleague stated. It just wasn't looked at as the thing to do, to go and see someone. If you had a problem, you would just go to church and you would pray about it, and it was supposed to go away. And if it didn't go away, then you weren't ushering your faith and your belief in the higher power. And I think it's very fine to believe in a higher power, but it's also okay to locate a person who's licensed, who can assist you. And I think one thing that we need to just say too is that one of the biggest things that, in terms of negative stigmas that are attached to, helping professionals as ourselves, is that people, because of certain shows on television, which I'm not going to name, they have this certain negative connotation associated with therapy, that the therapist is going to tell you what to do, tell you how to run your life. And that's just not how therapy is. And I always tell my colleagues, or even my students and even friends who have come to me and ask me about, you know, how this helping relationship works. If you have a therapist that's dictating to you what you should do, you need to find another therapist, because that's not our job. We don't tell our clients what to do. We're there to support, offer resources, and to assist in, you know, helping them or guide them in their correct decision making that they choose. Because you can't go into someone's house and tell them what to do. So you should not be, you know, delegating to a client what is right or wrong, because you don't have to live with those consequences if you do decide to do such a thing. And as a professional, that's just, you know, what I hear all the time, is that I was afraid to come to therapy because I don't want anyone telling me what to do. And, you know, we need to get out there that we're here to, you know, help. We're here to assist, not tell people what to do.
And also, Antoine, I think that the stigma stem from church. I've been a church guy all my life. And, you know, we've been told we just pray about it, leave it in the Lord's hands. I'm all right with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But we are mind, body, and spirit. That's my belief. Even Jesus himself had a physician on staff, the Apostle Luke. So we have to break the stigma in the church, because a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with running to the church to get the spiritual help that you need, but you may also need the psychological help to process what you're going through in life. And the spiritual side is to help strengthen the spiritual side. And in families, a lot of families look down on therapy. They wanted to keep everything private. We just have to break out of that stigma.
Mm-hmm.
And then a person who is going through whatever they're going through, some type of traumatic event, depressive event, they are ashamed. They don't want to be seen going to a therapist's office. They don't want to be seen going into a psychologist's office. They don't want to be put on medication. Then they develop, well, is there something wrong with me? You know, it gets very, very deep. But I think Dr. Outlaw said it best. We are helping professionals. That's what we are.
Mm-hmm. And I do agree with Dr. Armstrong 200%. If I could thumbs up it more than that, I would. But I just wanted to say, like, you know, when he talked about religion and how deep rooted it was in terms of our profession and its stigma, I actually had a friend that was working on a dissertation with an athlete from the University of Michigan. And she called me up at 3 a.m. and she said, I need you to talk to this gentleman. And I spoke to him, and he was working on a textbook. No, I'm sorry, he wasn't working on a textbook. He was working on a memoir about his playing days at the University of Michigan. And he was a church guy, and he had went and talked to his pastor, and his pastor was just like, pray about it. You have nothing to be depressed about. And that's another statement within itself that's just all wrong. But he was like, you have a beautiful family, and I understand trying to extend gratitude to a person's situation. But this guy was severely depressed because he couldn't play on Sundays. So I talked back to my friend, because she was interviewing him for her, like I said, her dissertation study. And I said, if you don't get this man some help, once he finishes this book, he's going to kill himself. And she said, you think so? And I said, I know so. So she completed her dissertation back in 2015. She graduated in May. She called me in June. He had completed his memoir and he killed himself. And it's just that we knew, you know, just as a helping professional. And she said, how did you know he was going to do that? And then she had called me prior to him committing suicide, because she said she was like, I don't know. I don't think you were right about this, because he's so happy now. And I said, what are you talking about? Because when a person commits suicide, they're not sad. Usually they're happy because they've come to a conclusion about what they're going to do. And that's another thing that we have to look out for, is that we think that when people kill themselves all the time, that they're lurking around so depressed, just looking around. They could be as happy as the sun outside. you know, and then they killed themselves. And people are so shocked. Well, they were smiling yesterday. Yeah, because they had came up with this solution to what they were going to do. And just, you know, his pastor felt so bad about it because he was like, I just didn't know. I just didn't see the warning signs because he wasn't trained to do something like that, you know? So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I think along with that, it's with physical health conditions. Like you don't tell somebody like if they're bleeding, like you're not bleeding, you're fine. It's like, no, I'm bleeding. Like, and so like you wouldn't like people don't understand that physical health and mental health are just so connected, and also understanding that you wouldn't deny somebody treatment if they had cancer or if they had a chronic illness. And so it's like, why do we do the same thing for mental illness? Just because you can't quote unquote see it and it's not visible, people tend to invalidate it. And so I think that goes along with the stigma as well. Like you can't see it and the person is working, you know, the typical 40 hours a week and they're producing or they look super successful, and that means that they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
mental illness is one of the most devastating illnesses to have, because it's not seen on the outside, it's internal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you go to the doctor and they press on something that's hurting, you're going to say, ouch, you know, that's where it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And with a mental illness, we have to dig deep to bring that out. And that's why mental health, being mentally healthy, is very important. And in the Black community, we have to get there. We have to get there. The stigma has got to go.
Mhm.
There's also another stigma that we don't talk about, or we hadn't talked about yet, and I'm pretty sure Dr. Armstrong and Ms. Osborne knows that we as Black people have to stop saying this myth too, that we don't kill ourselves. The Journal of American Medical Association reported back in 2018 and 2019 that Black males ages 5 to 12 were killing themselves at 2 times a higher rate than our white counterparts. So that's also something else that we need to just stop saying, that we don't kill ourselves, because we do. If you look in the media, you can see just early this year, Regina King's son, the young lady that was a pageant winner. It's just so many people. I remember Don Cornelius back in 2012, the guy that played Jet Jackson, the young Black male that did that. So, but you'll always hear a lot of times, well, Black people, we don't kill ourselves. Yeah, we do. And we also have to define what that looks like. I also had a student that went to New Orleans. He was doing very well here, and he did not want to move to New Orleans with his mother. And there was a lot of gang activity in the neighborhood that they went into, and he became very depressed because he left his friends and he had a lot of anxiety. So he decided to kill himself. But what he did was he walked into a territory wearing rival gang colors. And so it was recorded as a homicide instead of a suicide. So like I said, we have to understand what everything looks like. Everything is not always to the surface what we presented, you know, but that's one saying that we really need to just get away from.
I mean,
Sorry, Dr. Armstrong.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Even yesterday, my wife told me that Miss Alabama jumped from a apartment balcony and committed suicide. So suicide is real in the Black community. This is why it's so important to check on your loved ones, check on your friends. A simple hello, hey, how you doing? I haven't heard from you in a while can go a long way. It can open that door, because we don't know what mental state people are in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a couple things. A couple people posted comments, and I do apologize in advance because for some reason a lot of the people who are logging in is logging in under my name for whatever reason. So I do apologize. I don't know who asked the questions, but first, we do have a question from Danielle. She wanted you to talk a little bit about the broad spectrum of mental illness, which I think you did before at the very beginning. But she says, I feel as though whenever you tell someone that you're in therapy, they immediately think that you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also, to add on to that, someone added another comment that says, as for where the stigma, since this is related to stigma also, but as where the stigma originates, does it also come from being a people who historically has been traumatized? We've never had the luxury of asking how we're doing. We've been stuck in survival mode across generations. Could that also be a contributing factor?
It definitely is a contributing factor. I mean, historically, if you look at the history of our people, Black people, we were a suppressed people. So therefore, that suppression brought about depression, aggression, and so many other mental illnesses within us because we were not able to express how we felt. And this has been carried on through generation to generation. It's almost a generational curse, so to speak, if you want to call it that. And that curse has to be broken. I'm thankful now that, mental health availability to see a mental health professional is widely available. But Ms. Nicole stated earlier, if you go looking for a Black therapist, you're only going to find a very few of us in the profession.
Yeah. So
luckily, we are expanding in the profession. But historically, we've been a suppressed people, and that has carried on through generations. Our grandparents and our great-grandparents kept a lot of things in.
Right.
They had to go through, kept a lot of stories in that their ancestors went through that did not come out. And we carried that for generations.
Dr. Armstrong would be what I call a unicorn in this profession because we certainly lack Black male representation. I have athletes that, that desire a Black male therapist at times, and, they can't find one, not one where it's, suitable for them. And so, that's important, especially, like I said, when you have studies reporting, that high suicide rate with, I just want people to understand 5 to 12 years old. We don't even know who we are as people when we're 5 and 12 or 5 through 12. Like, I was still playing with Barbie dolls. I mean, so,
I think this day and age, there's a lot of pressure developing on younger Black Americans. And there's so much stress, peer pressure. Nowadays, I didn't grow up with a cell phone. Nowadays, kids as young as 5 have cell phones, and sometimes parents are not checking those conversations that are going on. You don't know if your child is being bullied, or you see your child acting differently and you don't know why. We have to be very proactive because it's a different day and age. Communication is widely available to them. When they're playing on their parents' phone and you don't know what they're really looking at, they could be looking at your messages and they may see something that traumatizes them. We don't know. So the pressures and the what we call the pleasures of life may really be affecting our children.
They definitely are. I mean, I work a lot with teenagers, and so to hear about, I ask them all the time, like, so how many hours do you spend on social media on your phone? They're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, let's pull up your phone right now then and let's check. And so we do it in session, and I know it seems kind of blunt, but like, I've had some clients say like 10 hours. I'm like, 10 hours? Like, are you in school? What's going on? How do you have 10 hours to be on your phone? And I know that goes with virtual learning. Like, you could be on your phone while on Zoom class, all that. But social media has impact. And it's great that people are talking more and more about social media. But at the same hand, some people are also self-diagnosing themselves, which can be dangerous as well. And so, just being mindful, like Dr. Armstrong said, just being mindful if you have children, being mindful of the content that they're consuming, mindful of, how much of that content they're consuming, because there's trauma online as well. So witnessing trauma and witnessing violence, we're connected to just so much violence and so much media that it can be really overwhelming and cause depression, especially in teens. Comparing themselves to other people, everybody showing this perfect image of themselves. And so then that also leads to suicide because people are like, oh my gosh, my life's not like them. Their life is perfect. So then they get depressed and then they kill themselves. And so it's really sad how social
And
media.
that even carries over to some adults.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Even some adults, their social media intake is at an astronomical level, and they're looking at what their friends doing and they're not doing it, and it just brings about this depressive feeling on them. And then they feel like their life is just in shambles. Well, we have to understand what social media really is. You're only seeing a snippet of a person's life. You only are being allowed to see what they show you.
Right.
You don't know what they did to go on that vacation. You don't know what they did to buy that house. You don't know what they did to get that wedding together or something like that. So
Yeah,
social media,
you compare your normal life to a highlight reel, right?
yeah.
I want to double back for just a moment. We do have a question that related to teens. So if you want to jump in for this, we have a question that says, where can I get free therapy counseling session for teens, or are there counselors that just specialize in therapy for teens, or where can they find this? I guess we'll cover where they can find it a little bit later toward the end about finding resources. But are there counselors that just specialize in teenage therapy?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a number of therapists that do. For myself personally, I specialize in teens, and my husband's also a therapist, so he specializes in children and teens. And so, well, like you said, Antoine, we'll talk about this more later on. But if you are Googling, do a simple, just like teen therapist, and then insert your area. Or if you find therapist directories, there's a way to filter it so you can filter for teenagers. So all the therapists that work with teenagers will pop up and populate on the pages.
Okay. And we also have a couple questions. It looks like in the comments, the church is a very trending topic right now. So we're going to go to what Dr. Outlaw called the unicorn, Dr. Armstrong, if you like. Dr. Armstrong, there's a couple questions for you specifically. And I guess you could relate all of this together. The question is, Dr. Armstrong, do you see mental health in the church? And if so, how would you handle it? And also, do you receive criticism from quote unquote church folks regarding your work as a therapist?
Churches nowadays are opening up to mental health. I know there are some churches who have counseling centers. The Presbyterian Church has a big counseling center here in Greensboro. And then there are other localized churches who are, directing their parishioners to go to get mental health services. I'm sorry, the second part of the question is, do I get any?
Yes, do you get any criticism from quote unquote church folk from being a therapist?
No, I haven't, honestly. I haven't. I think there's a silent acceptance. Well, I'm going to say a silent acceptance, but a kind of a whispered acceptance of parishioners needing to get psychological services. I actually have church members who are a part of my practice, who I see on a regular basis, and I commend them for that. Of course, it's all confidential, but I don't get any type of criticism. I don't see that. And if they did criticize me, then they could come talk to me. I'll let them see the importance in what I do.
Right. Okay. Well, one other question specifically for Dr. Armstrong. Do you receive criticism? How do you draw the church and mental health professionals together, such as more training for pastors in seminary?
Pastors definitely need to be trained in psychological services, in some type of psychological services. The chaplains associations are now doing more psychological training for pastors. However, the pastor needs to be open to doing it. Nothing is prohibiting them, and their theological perspective is not being diminished by getting psychological training. I feel as though I don't want to say we're sheeple, so to speak, but people follow the direction of a pastor, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that pastor is directing them to get certain psychological services, I think it would kind of bridge that gap, because people have faith in their pastor. And if he's saying, look, sweetheart, go see someone, sit down and talk to them about this, that's just bridging that gap together. And I think that would help the church, that would help the Black community, because the church is one of the foundations of the Black community outside of the family. I think it would just help bridge the gap. So about more of our pastors, we got some psychological training inside in those services, it would help. It would definitely.
Okay. All right. Well, let's change focus a little bit now. Let's talk more about the issues dealing with mental health and kind of how they, the root causes. Again, doubling back. So we were talking about some of the historical factors. What about we have like some historical events, mistrust in the medical system. Also, there's like environmental, generational curses, chemical imbalances, all these different topics. How do you see that as something that we can kind of identify? Because they look different. Well, sometimes they look the same, but a lot of times they'll start off looking different. In an interview earlier today or yesterday, Mrs. Osborne talked a little bit about, she said she made a reference to some family members. In general, just in family members, we might say, oh, that's just crazy Aunt Lulu, or you know how she is, and things like that. We might feel like it's funny, but do you want to talk about that a little bit? Some of that.
Those are stapled phrases in the Black family, I can tell you that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, or oh, we don't talk about, so like we don't talk about, what happened with whatever. And I see that a lot with clients that I work with who have been sexually abused by family members, and they're like, oh, no, we don't talk about that, or oh, that didn't happen. And so my clients are bearing that and holding that in for years upon years. And what I've also seen is my clients who've been sexually abused, their parent was sexually abused. And so it's like this generational curse and pattern of silencing people who have been abused by family members. I know that's going off topic, but that was the thing that came to mind, is that, there's silence in Black families too, which causes more harm.
Dr. Allo?
I mean, for me, everything she said was spot on. Everything that's been on the panel. I mean, we all have a significant amount of experience in practice, so we've seen it all. And what Ms. Osborne is referring to is like what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that clients go through, or just people go through. I don't like to say clients per se, but I think what you were saying, getting back to your question, I think you were kind of talking about how we as professionals define crisis. And, like we define a crisis by nature as like a time limited event, because, like a person, they cannot tolerate, like extreme tension and psychological disequilibrium for more than a few weeks, right? So a lot of the stuff that, like when I ask my students, for example, like, how can a person commit suicide, or why do you think a person did it? They start naming different things, but they have no idea that those situations, like a divorce, like a pet dying, like a loved one dying, or drugs and alcohol, or whatever, maybe an injury to a player, they have no idea that those things are crisis situations or crisis events, because it's how a person chooses to not be, well, I shouldn't say choose, that's not, scratch it off the record. It's just how a person cannot handle a situation, their inability to handle a situation. So when you start talking about those situations or examples that you named earlier, those are what we would call crisis events that would, perpetuate a person into probably a state of suicide at some point, if not help.
Yeah. with that, it's, you know, and in addition to crisis, if you think about it, somebody has had multiple crises or multiple traumas, that's just exacerbated more and more and more. And so with that, that can be bullying, that could be emotional neglect, domestic violence, you know, natural disasters, all the things that Dr. Outlaw already mentioned. And so also within the Black community, if we take in socioeconomic status, like if you come from a low income neighborhood and you have lack of access to your basic needs being met. So if you don't have food, you don't have clothes, you don't have a bed, you go to school with, you know, clothes on that people are making fun of you. And so then that's another trauma to add traumatic environment you've already been in. And also experience community violence. And so if you take all that into account, it makes sense why somebody is suffering because they have events that have negatively impacted them.
And a lot of times the mindset is that this is my life. There's nothing I can do to change it. They become products of the environment, so to speak, not realizing that there's help out there to get you out of that mindset. You know, we are not our environment. We can create a new environment. I'm all about reinventing who you are. So, you know, our culture is a very, very diverse culture. I think we can all agree with that. However, in that diversity, there's classism, you know, and a lot of times when we're bombarded with, you know, the negative exception, it leads that person to do certain things.
Yeah, as Black Americans, we go through a lot. And, you know, and just kind of echo what the panel said, what Ms. Osborne was talking about basically is what I did my dissertation on, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And Abraham Maslow had a unique pyramid where he talked about, you know, a person's basic needs and you know, he talked about their emotional and all of that. And he basically stated that if you are missing some of those needs, you're going to die. That was essentially the research. But having said all that, as Black Americans, a lot of times our needs are not met. Maybe it's a financial need, maybe it's an acceptance need, an emotional need, food, water, like she said, just basic needs. I mean, if you have clients coming into your office and they're worried about their electric bill, they're not going to sit down and want to talk to you about an intake. You have to make sure, or an assessment, you're going to have to make sure that you know, help that client or assist that client with that need that they currently have. And like I said, as Black Americans, we go through a lot. We still have a lot of health disparities. We still are under earning compared to our counterparts. I mean, Black women are the most educated race and gender, but our net worth for the most part is $5. So a lot of people say, well, how is that possible when you guys are the most educated race and gender? And one, if you ask people, they're not going to even know that. They're probably going to assume that it's Asian Americans who are the most educated race and gender. But we, right now, we lead the pack, but we don't have any money. And so people are saying, well, what are you spending your money on? We're spending our money on hair. We're spending our money on things that make us look good. We're in a lot of debt from going to college. So, you know, you can be a very well-rounded person in society and still be, you know, quote unquote, under earning or underachieving in their mind, which causes other ripple effects in other parts of their life or the facets of life.
Great. Okay, I have a couple other questions here, a couple other comments. One participant said, seen as a lack of faith, being ashamed not being dependent totally on God, going to the altar and leave your confusion, fears, etc. there at the altar. So I think they were referring to some of the comments before when we were talking about going to the church and just some of the stigmas and where they come from. But we have a couple other commenters. Actually several would like to know about how to find help. And how do you know when you need help? So let's talk about that first. How do you identify if you need help? Like, is there a certain sign that you look for, or when you start to think, maybe I should go talk to somebody? Can you talk about what that process is like? And once you realize you need help, or once you think you do, what kind of evaluation process do you have? Do you conduct phone interviews, or do you just do a Google search? how do you find someone?
You can do all of that. And how I measure how much a person needs, even people around me, is their level of functioning. You know, I always just, you know, look at just kind of like, if a person, do they shower? Do they get up for the day? You know, just how they feeling. Are they totally isolated from everybody? A lot of times, you know, we see these memes that say, check on your strong friends, you know, but I tend to look at people who laugh all the time, because people that tend to smile or laugh all the time are usually the ones that are hurting the most inside. And you hear them agreeing, because we know. And that's what I was, you know, trying to say about, you know, people be getting really happy when they're about to commit suicide. That's a big red flag if you work in this profession. And I've worked in crisis intervention for a long time, but you can do a Google search. You can look at, I think you guys can tell me, Psychology Today, don't they have a listserv of Black therapists? So you can, go ahead, Nicole.
You can filter it.
Yeah. It's just a lot of different ways. Logic, the rapper, right? He had the song that he recited the telephone number for the suicide hotline. You can always call that. You know, that number is in the song, but it's 1-800-273-8255. I know it by heart, unfortunately, but it's just a lot of different ways to try to get help. You know, as Dr. Armstrong and Nicole and I stated, but especially Dr. Armstrong, since he is, you know, like more of a central figure in the church, you can reach out to your pastors for counseling, and hopefully your pastor can connect you to other mental health resources or services. So.
And, you know, I think it's some self-evaluation that a person can do. I mean, if you know that you're just not yourself, do a self-evaluation as to, you know, I don't do the things that I used to find pleasure in. I don't find pleasure in them anymore. So a self-evaluation, and then seek out the help for what you feel as though you may be going through.
Yeah.
Nobody knows you better than you.
And along with that, you know, signs of anxiety, depression, and trauma, that could look like, you know, excessive worry, you feel restless, or you feel jittery, or you feel tension in your body, if you're having sleep issues, if you're withdrawing, having a hard time concentrating just in life in general, or at work or at school. If you notice you're really irritable, or anger outbursts. I know a lot of my clients come, they're like, I have anger issues. And I'm like, underneath all that is sadness. So anger is a big key factor. And so if you notice you're really irritable, going off on people, if you have low motivation, or if you feel super fatigued, it's really hard to get out of bed. If you're having thoughts of suicide or thoughts of just not wanting to be here. Also, if you're hypervigilant, so if you're always on guard and like, who's gonna hurt me, who's out for me, I can't trust the world. I've heard that from people, like, I can't trust anybody. You know, I have to do it all on my own. So I would say those are some big red flags as well. And so honestly, if you're even considering and thinking about going to therapy, that's probably a sign that it's time to go to therapy. So that's what I have to say on that.
She's spot on with everything, but also people need to understand that symptoms look different for everybody. And because you Google WebMD, and you see that this is what, you know, they list some symptoms for, like, for example, depression, that may not look like depression for you. You know, it may be something totally different. That's why it's imperative to go see a professional.
Yeah, and also with that, I help my clients be more connected to their bodies. And so if you notice something just goes off in your body, or you're having gut issues, or you feel like, oh, I have lower back pain, but you realize you didn't do anything physically that did it. Sometimes we hold trauma in our memories in our body. So if you notice these reoccurring pains, you notice you feel triggered, a lot of times those are also some signs that it's time to seek out help.
I have a commenter here. I want you to talk a little bit about that, because they've mentioned, you know, not wanting to take prescription drugs. Now, some people feel like therapy is, you know, you just go to therapy, you get drugs and prescriptions and things. But can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that's not the only way that therapy works.
I go ahead, Nicole. I feel it. Go ahead, because I knew it was gonna go. Like, go ahead.
I have a lot to say on
Right.
medication. I'm not saying medication is bad, but if you're seeing a therapist and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is saying you need medication, to me, that's a red flag because the therapist doesn't truly know you just yet. And so they don't know all of what's going on for you. Also, it's important to know that therapists are not psychiatrists, and those are two separate entities. So therapists do not prescribe medication, psychiatrists prescribe medication. So if you go to see a therapist and after a couple sessions, your therapist might say, hey, have you considered medication? And they're openly asking it, then that's a good sign. But if they're saying like, no, you need to be on medication, that's a little bit concerning. But you can also just have a conversation with the psychiatrist. You could say like, hey, I'm noticing this, and this. My therapist recommended, I try it out, but I don't think it should be the number one go-to. Like, let me get on medication or let me hop on medication. I think there's ways to get to that. And again, it's not saying medication is bad. It's just that pills can sometimes mask some of the underlying stuff that's going on.
Then there's the dependency upon it as well. There are so many holistic ways to help overcome certain traumas in life. And so, there are different approaches that can be made before getting on medication. Medication should not be the number one answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have a participant that asked a question about, have you seen an increase in patients with COVID?
I have, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pandemic has really altered moods and situations for people. I mean, people having to be closed up, people losing their jobs, people losing loved ones. I mean, it's just been a lot since, I would say I've seen a spike since 2019, which they really kind of said that COVID came into the country in October 2019, and that's kind of when my clientele went up. And I mean, and people are so, so grateful to have that human interaction. I mean, teletherapy is booming, and, just because, having to be closed up for a long time, people miss human interaction. At one point I felt like we as Americans were taking it, just human interaction for granted. And what I mean by that is that we were using technology to communicate for the most part. We would say, oh, how is so-and-so doing? Oh, they're doing okay. I saw that they posted on Facebook. Well, how do you know they're okay? They just made a post on Facebook, but you don't know they're okay. But, I think the pandemic made people, since we had to be closed away, I think it made people, not saying that it's over with, but we're approaching, I guess, more of the endemic than the pandemic or whatever. I think it made people appreciate human interaction a little bit more. So my clientele went up.
Yeah, mine definitely went up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, mine definitely went up. I started becoming a therapist. I got my degree from UNCG May 2020. And so I graduated in the pandemic and started my business in the pandemic. And as soon as I started, a couple months later, I was filling up just because the need was so great.
Okay. Well, let's double back just for a moment here. We have a couple questions related to therapy in children again. One is, have you all noticed an increase in young kids in school talking about bullying?
Absolutely. I have. I mean, but not just in young kids for me either. Like, I don't know if this is a topic that they care to hear about, but just in college alone, there's a lot of bullying on that level, and I was shocked. Especially, with certain private groups on Facebook bullying or targeting certain college kids. So I know it's happening on the middle school and elementary school level because I'm a board member in my county, and we hear a lot about bullying and how cyberbullying has caused kids to consider suicide and attempt suicide as well as complete suicide.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Would you care to expound on that, since you also specialize in teens and children?
Personally, I have not seen it in my clients. That's not primary concerns, which does not mean that it's not happening. But I know there's definitely been an uptick in cyberbullying with people just attacking people in the comments and, you know, cancel culture, canceling people after they say something that's wrong, whether that's related to social justice issues or just any issue in general. And so I know that has been a big, well, canceling people and writing people off after, you know, making whether that's intentional mistakes or unintentional mistakes. But as far as my teen clientele, I haven't seen much of bullying, but I know it definitely, when I worked in the elementary school system, I know that was a thing.
Mhm. Okay. Well, another question related to children. Actually, we have a couple more, but one is I have a 12-year-old nephew who went to a funeral of a friend that was about his age. When asked what happened, he simply said that his friend was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He is seeking sports in school as an outlet. How can I help from a distance? How can I help him with his unspoken grief?
Mm.
Looking kind of for specifics.
Mm.
Mhm.
If you have any advice, and also just as a note, if you have some additional questions for any of the therapists, if you if you could post your email address and your question in the chat box, or if you want to just reach out to me directly and I'll forward it to the therapist, you can do that as well, just in case we run out of time. But you can do that anytime. And you can reach me here at the Public Library Central in Greensboro. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would think
Go
that, oh, sorry, Dr. Outlaw.
No, you go.
I feel as though continuing to communicate with the young man, the 12-year-old, is probably the best action to take. Sitting down with him, asking the questions, how are you feeling today? Is there anything you would like to talk about? Allowing him to express his grief would probably be the best action to take. I would not close him off and say, well, you know, you're going to get over it. It's going to be all right. Time to heal. Allow him to be expressive and just express how he feels, no matter how long it takes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely using, like, I don't know, but a lot of people kind of got away from, having dinner and supper with each other, as they say, sitting down and actually having a conversation. I use board games. I know I'm old school, but board games, people tend to talk a lot. And, you said he played sport. I'm a big sports man. So I use the conversation of their sport, their prospective sport to, use that as a communication segue, because we're an athletic hub here. We're considered, ESPN named my hometown. I think we've had more basketball players per capita than anywhere in the country. We're
And
like
Lenore, Kingston.
Yes.
All right.
We've had more basketball players per capita. And matter of fact, 1 in every 10,000 basketball players make it everywhere else, but 1 in 100 hoopers make it in Kinston. So that's our statistic. So, so I would try to communicate with them through their sport. And usually that works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, piggybacking on that same thing, there was a question related that says, is it important, or do you think it's important for a younger male to have a therapist who's also a male? Like, do they relate better, or can you relate better, or is that important?
I think it's all about the relatability. Sometimes males speaking to younger males can kind of have this lordship over them, but if there's a relatability between the male therapist and the young client, it can be very beneficial in his life. Not knowing the circumstances around it, but we know statistically that there are, the broken homes and the dad not being in the home, or maybe the mom not being in the home. But male therapists, I was called a unicorn, which I accept that. Um, I think there's a very special place for a male therapist to communicate with our young Black men. Something that I specialize in. My practice is fully loaded with young Black men, and I appreciate that they're trying to better themselves. So it can be very beneficial as long as there's a relatability.
Mhm.
I agree with him. Representation is important, but I also tell my students, like, like, it's kind of a double-edged sword too, because, like, I do substance abuse counseling too. And, I don't want them to feel like because I've never done drugs that I can't assist them, so it's just like Dr. Armstrong said, that a relatability there. But I do let them know up front, hey, I don't do drugs, but I can, help you. And, and there does have to be some sort of relatability there to help for them to, build that relationship of trust and rapport with you.
Yep. I agree. I agree with both you all said. So as long as you feel connected to the therapist or connected to the therapist, that's all that matters. That's the number one success factor for therapy, is you having that genuine relationship with your therapist, whether they look like you or whether they don't look like you. And so related to Black mental health, yes, it's great to have a Black therapist, and at the same time, no, you can get good work from a non-Black therapist. And so you don't have to close off those options. For some clients that I've talked to, it's important that they have a Black therapist. And for other clients, it didn't really matter to them. And so again, it's about that relatability and that humanity.
Well, how do you actually evaluate patients? That's one of the questions from the chat box.
I mean, we use, that can kind of vary. So I don't really like to they can help out here. We all are kind of different, but we do assessments. I mean, we do intake assessment forms, and we have questions that help us kind of filter some things out that would help us with treatment planning, diagnosing, resources, referrals if needed, and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that sums it up right there.
Somebody in the chat box asked about a therapist at the Boys and Girls Club. I don't think a therapist is
I've
on
never
staff.
heard of a therapist at a Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah. Me either.
I mean, they may have some resources for referral.
Right. Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
think there's any right there at it.
Yes, do any initial phone evaluations, an hour questionnaire. So this sounds like a phone consultation. Yes.
Yeah.
Y'all do an intake process. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So typically what happens is when you reach out to a therapist, you call them or you email them and say, hey, I want to set up a phone consultation. And this phone consultation is usually between 20 and 30 minutes. It depends. Again,
Mine's 10 minutes.
Oh, yours is 10 minutes, mine's 15. And so for some people, for the therapist, it helps them evaluate and ask questions about you and who you are, and if the therapist is the best person to meet your needs. So for example, if you call a therapist and you say like, hey, feeling super anxious, and I've been feeling anxious for a while now, and the therapist specializes in anxiety, then the therapist asks you some more follow-up questions about your anxiety. I feel like it's a good fit, then during that phone consultation, you and the therapist can schedule intake. However, if you talk to a therapist and, for example, are going through a divorce and the therapist does not, I guess, specialize in divorce, or that's not their area of expertise, they may refer you to somebody else who does have that specialty. For a lot of therapists, they like to stay within their niche or their, because that's the area that they have experience in. Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, I guess we have this.
Yeah, we have an open space.
Right.
Ask away.
Yeah.
We're still here.
Yeah. We didn't talk about the Golden Gate Bridge either. And that's like one of the most sought out suicide. Well, it's where people go and commit suicide every year, or attempt to. And more than 1,600 people have committed suicide there. And it is so interesting because I was actually in Cali sometime last year, and to listen to the stories about the people that live there and how people romanticize jumping down about 300 feet off a bridge. And like, some people don't die. And it's like, when you hit that water at that fast and that high, like they could break every bone in their body and just like frail in the water, you know? And they romanticize, like they come all over the world to do it. I think they said that first time someone committed suicide on that bridge was 3 years after it opened.
After it opened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they actually have, like, we actually had a person jump off the bridge, I think over the summer in Mr. Hawkins' hometown. And that was the first time I've ever heard someone do that. But that's also starting to be the thing where, you know, people are kind of taking the Golden Gate Bridge idea and implementing them in towns, becoming bridge jumpers. And so we need to kind of, you know, like maybe advocate for nets to be around bridges so that, you know, if someone decided, or have crisis workers, because they do this all day on the Golden Gate Bridge.
You know, one last word.
Yeah.
If you are in need of help, please seek out the help. Don't let the stigma stop you. There are so many ways now that you can get the therapy and the professional help that you need in a private setting. So don't let the stigma stop you. Reach out, get the help that you need. There are so many qualified professionals who really do care about what they do that are ready to assist you in help. So please do reach out and get the help.
Mm-hmm. I guess for me, last words would be going off what Dr. Armstrong said. There's no harm in getting help and just giving it a try. You don't know until you start. I've had clients who have been hesitant at first, and then after, and this isn't for all clients, so I don't want to put an expectation that this is how therapy goes, but some people even after the intake are like, oh my gosh, like I feel so relieved, I got that off my chest. And so just imagine having a space that's non-judgmental to talk about whatever it is you need to talk about, for somebody who truly cares for you and won't judge you, and somebody who will validate you. It's the best experience in the world. Like even me being a therapist, I've been to therapy before too. And so there's also the stigma that, oh, therapists know everything and they're perfect and they're fine. And that's not the reality. A lot of people who specialize in what they do have been through those similar issues. And so they can connect with you in that way. But if you're seeking out therapy,
That paper on that computer.
talk about it with other people. I've had so many clients say like, oh, I've been to therapy. I've told my mom, I told my sister, I told my brother. And so once you begin your healing, it activates other people's healing.
Right.
Get the help that you need.
Just to kind of echo the sentiments of the panel, I mean, all of that is all correct. I would also say too, just love yourself more. Establish healthy boundaries with people. If someone or something is, you know, making your feelings, I don't know, just invalidated, or just doing things that make yourself feel bad, don't do that anymore. You know, and the advice I have for anyone that's lost a loved one, just seek out help. And if you, as they all echoed, if you're feeling that you need to talk to someone, the best thing to do is reach out. It doesn't matter who it is. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a family member, reach out to a professional. It really doesn't matter. Just reach out. We also have, like I said, a suicide hotline number, and that's 1-800-273-8255. And, you know, just make sure you care about you first. Put yourself first. Sometimes we don't do that. We don't put ourselves first, but put your feelings first.
Lowell's all yours.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and I do apologize that we had technical difficulties here. I do want to mention a couple things. First of all, thank you to the panelists. Ms. Nicole Osborne, she has milk and honey therapy in Greensboro, North Carolina. We have Dr. Armstrong, who also has a practice here in Greensboro, North Carolina, and that is empowering counseling, faith-based services. We also have Dr. Kimberly Outlaw, who is a lecturer and an author, and she's currently working on a textbook.
Yeah, but I practice too in Goldsboro, but I'm way away from you guys.
but actually we have people throughout North Carolina, actually outside of the state, joining in too.
Okay.
So we have them all over. Yeah, but if you want to reach out to any of the licensed therapists, you can call me here at Central Library in Greensboro, and I could forward the information over, or you could just reach out to them. You can find them on any of the social media platforms. They are there. Also, I would like to just say that hopefully our program will help you or someone that you know or love on the road to mental health and wellness by decreasing disparities in the mental health care, removing barriers, and eliminating stigmas. Let us continue this conversation about mental health in the Black community. Let's talk about it. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.